So around that time during Occupy Wall Street, I was witnessing a lot of like police brutality, and I was like, "What the fuck? Like, this isn't something I'm familiar with." It raised a lot of red flags. To me, I was always told, and I definitely genuinely believe this, that cops were here to protect our rights, to serve the community, and all that nonsense. So basically, at that point, I just had enough. Like I had a fire inside that lit, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do whatever I can using the free tools in front of me with social media to hold police accountable, however I can. And that was it, man. That's all it took. I started Police the Police in 2012, a year later. And very shortly, within a few months, that thing started to take off. It started to blow up because there was a huge demand for police accountability information that wasn't necessarily like couched in some of the leftist kind of movement, leftist rhetoric. And so libertarians were starting to see like the militarization of police, the police state that was kind of starting to form. And so a lot of people were kind of concerned and worried about what was happening. So that immediately took off. And around that same time, I met my business partner and the editor in chief for the Free Thought Project, Mr. Matt Agrist, who you guys should definitely have on the show sometime. But
Open, down,
yeah,
let's do it.
yeah. No, he's a good guy, great writer. And we decided we were both working for a website at that point. We decided we could do kind of the same internet journalism stuff and do it better and do it with our own flavor of information and whatnot. So in 2013, we started the Free Thought Project, and man, within a short period of time, we were rolling, bro. Like the page, the accounts, the website, like everything was blowing up and taking off. And again, yeah, the golden, era of social media, like we had full organic reach. They weren't throttling us, they weren't shadow banning us. So there was a desire, there was a hunger for this type of information, and people really, really wanted it. So we were kind of just feeding that market demand, and we were able to, within a very short time, put together a team of 7 different writers, a whole social media team, a video editing team. We were reaching millions of people, man, like upwards of like 30, 40 million people a week, like just blowing
Wow.
CNN and mainstream media out of the water. And I know it sounds crazy. I have all the screenshots, I have all the receipts. Like, hit me up, I'll show them to you. Yeah, we were, bringing in like 20, 30,000 new followers a week. Like it was rolling, man. We were thriving. And I think it was in 2017 we even had like a billion video views. So like things were definitely going well for us. And during that time, like we were the pioneers of alternative media. There's a group of us. There was the anti-media, there was Press for Truth, there was punk rock libertarians. We kind of had this whole network that we would all share information with, share posts with, and stuff. And starting around like 2017, then at 2017, 2018, we started to notice there was a lot more shadow banning going on, a lot more censorship. Of course, that's when the Trump fake news narrative came in. We started seeing fact checkers, at play, and everything started to change. And by October of 2018, we were taken down by both Facebook and Twitter, as I was just mentioning. And
Oh,
we lost 6 million fans within a couple hours. So it was definitely coordinated, as you can imagine. Twitter and Facebook, like how do they? And there was more too. I think we got a YouTube strike that same day as well. But yeah, man, it was devastating. We had to let go of our entire team, and that's kind of like where the story climaxes. But luckily, just recently, even though we've been putting in the work over the years to kind of build up our fans and kind of build up a new social media presence. Just recently, we've garnered some funding again. We had an angel investor come in, and so the story arc is still continuing, thank God. And we're putting the band back together and kind of getting back on our feet here. So the story isn't over yet, but through all that shit, man, I basically kind of realized that like the most important thing here is like we started this really believing that we could change the world with social media, but like we kind of found like that Aldous Huxley quote. It's like, I wanted to change the world, but I've only found that the only thing that you could actually change is yourself, and so over the past few years, just kind of, yeah, gone more inward, done my own work. And as much as I love sharing the information and trying to change hearts and minds, like it's become increasingly more difficult with the way that social media is set up now. So I'll shut up for a second, but that's kind of the
no,
gist
dude,
of
it's fire, bro. It's so funny. I'll go on podcasts and I'll just talk, and at the end I'll be like, "Oh, I didn't shut up. I'm sorry." They're like, "It's great, bro.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
great." The worst is when someone doesn't talk. So it's great, dude. Don't even worry about we've seen what happens when there are no cops. Like
Sure.
this, no, like what do we do? And I'm asking an honest question because it seems when you pull law enforcement out,
Yeah.
the gentleman agreement of, you know, in the food court or the wherever we're all meeting, we used to have social contracts where we would all agree we're not going to do this. We're all going to just show each other respect. That seems to have gone out the door, especially when they don't think there's consequences, and hurt people tend to hurt people. What
Absolutely.
are your thoughts on that? Because I agree with you. I think if you have cops and there's no consequences for your actions, people just go crazy. But when you don't have cops, people seem to go crazy as well.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, this is a bit of a bit of a, important topic, and it'll take a second to unpack here, but I mean, ultimately, I'm a libertarian. I believe in the right to self-defense, right? So obviously, I think more people should be armed. I think more people should be proficient and training and knowing how to use their firearms. Armed society is a polite society, right? But at the end of the day, I also believe in the division of labor. I don't think that just because you own a gun, you have an AR underneath your bed or whatever, that you're going to want to be doing neighborhood patrols all the time, every day, all day. So I get this a lot. People say, well, you just hate all cops. You don't want cops to exist. No, that's not correct. That's not my position. My position is I don't want a monopoly on law enforcement. And I think that's where all of the problems come from when it comes to law enforcement and police, because ultimately, to me, it's an economic issue. It doesn't have to do with racism like the mainstream wants to point at and the left wants to point at. It might be a part of it, but to me, this is an economic issue. It's the fact that law enforcement is funded by our extracted tax dollars involuntarily. So every other market function in society we voluntarily pay for because we find value in it. But law enforcement and police, they get funded through our taxation regardless of their performance, regardless of how effective they are, how efficient they are, their accountability or willingness to improve. They don't have to worry about any of that stuff because one way or another, they have their flow of cash coming in. So that to me is ultimately the problem. Now, I know that gets a little confusing for people because they think, well, what does that mean? There's just a gang of various different private security and protection companies that are running around like the Pinkertons and they end up all killing each other or whatever. I don't think it's going to be quite like that, but I do believe that that is a better option because we actually have a real life example. I have a friend in Detroit, and you might even know this guy. He's turned into a meme over the past couple of years, but his name's Dale Brown from the Detroit Threat Management Center. He's been all over the internet because he's doing these self-defense like videos and
Yeah, yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You know him?
Oh yeah, yeah, he's a good friend.
That
He's a bit of lefty. He's a little out there when it comes to his politics and stuff, but he's actually proven in Detroit, in a not very good area of Detroit, that he has his own private security company, protection agency that, it's been going now for what, 25 plus years. They've never had anybody on their watch be killed, any of their customers, any of their employees have never been arrested or anything. Like these guys are the professionals. And as the name says, they're threat management. So they try to de-escalate situations. They have a whole mental toolbox of how to de-escalate situations rather than escalate them like law enforcement does. So there is somebody out there that we could point to say, like, this guy's the way that we're supposed to do it. This guy's doing it correctly. Because the whole approach to police culture and the way that police view protection is completely half-assed backwards. This guy, Dale Brown, has a completely different approach to it, where it's actually based in love, not just this monopoly security agency that claims the right to initiate force on you. And that's more or less what police do right now. They claim the legal monopoly to initiate violence on people. And that's more or less where I think is kind of the problem here.
and listen, the listeners of the show are wonderfully open-minded people, and I know they're listening. There could be a couple people that might get upset with that, what you're saying. I just want to bring up that just remember during COVID, right? During COVID, they were just all about forcing businesses to shut down and all that stuff. My cousin's a cop. He tells me all the time how hard it is to be a cop. My heart
Sure,
goes out to him. My grandfather was a cop. I
sure.
understand it's a very tough thing. But you're right, man. You're right. If you take a look at these LA fires, Rick Caruso had a like almost like a privatized city. And he had his own fire department, and they were able to handle everything right there. And you go, okay, that's great. So my question, well, okay, and maybe you answered it. Detroit, maybe poor neighborhoods. The neighborhood regulates itself, or is that what you're talking about?
That is one option, absolutely. But I would say that people are more inclined to probably pay for those types of services. And by doing so, we actually, by paying voluntarily, we have more control over these types of agencies or firms that would produce this type of protection security service for us. Right now, we can't take our dollar and our money away from current law enforcement that's currently protecting us or serving our community, right? And that gives us so much more leverage. It kind of takes out the possibility of any type of coercion. And also gives us better options because look, if let's say the security company that we paid for decides to stop my, 16-year-old son while he's driving home and rough him up, well, guess what? Like we take our money elsewhere. Me and the community or neighborhood or however small it's fragmented into, we actually have the option to be like, you know what? Like this firm sucks. Like that's the way they're going to behave. Let's go somewhere else. Let's find a different provider for this. But we don't have that option right now within law enforcement. And just a quick caveat, I'm sure that your cousin, your uncle are good people who are cops, and I'm not a collectivist. I'm not one of those people that think that like every cop is bad because that's an individual, and I know that each individual has their own mind. And what I'm saying is the institution itself is flawed through the very mechanism of its funding. So if it wasn't a monopoly, there would be a significant difference, and we would see actually quality protection and security services. And that's just something we don't have right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what you brought up George Floyd, from somebody from your perspective, what is your thoughts on the whole George Floyd thing?
Well, to me, it's kind of a bit surprising that that one was the one that met mega viral. That was the one that everybody kind of focused on because even prior to that, like a week before that, we were covering stories that seemed much more graphic and brutal and just horrific. And don't get me wrong, the way that George Floyd died, of course, wasn't exactly pleasant, but I feel like it got turned into a mantra for the left. And part of me understands that because prior to George Floyd, there was so many huge national police brutality stories that went mega viral that people across the country were protesting, and I think people just had enough. They had enough with the recklessness of law enforcement, and so I think part of that was an organic response to what had happened to George Floyd and people's just being at a fever pitch. They were just frustrated and tired, and they didn't know any other way to express their dismay, their dissatisfaction. The other part of me does see how it was co-opted by the mainstream, by the Democrats, by the left. Black Lives Matter, all this obviously blew up. During that time, ironically, nobody was reaching out to me or Police the Police for interviews or to talk about us because, again, it was this assumption that anything that has to do with police accountability, it's baked into this left form of activism, And so they didn't want to hear what I was just explaining to you, that we can't actually have incremental reform. We're not going to have politicians that are going to fix police. They didn't want to hear that the answer is privatizing these things. The answer to them was, oh, we just point fingers at the racist cops and we ask politicians to maybe make a few marginal changes and eventually everything is going to get better. And that's completely delusional. We've been protesting police brutality in this country since 1886. That's, as far as I know, the very first police accountability protest is called the Haymarket Riot, where they were protesting people killed by police. 1886, Sam, that's a long time. And the fact
Damn.
that, yeah, the fact that things haven't changed through incremental reform, through politics, should be all the evidence that we need that it's never going to change. And you know what does change things? This right here, a phone actually recording when people are being brutalized, when people are being hurt, or even killed by police. Viral videos actually create change in society. People realize now what's actually happening within law enforcement, that they are largely a gang of, rogue actors who don't have to abide by the law. So yeah, it's a very interesting place that we kind of found ourselves in. But as I was saying, in the beginning of this podcast, it does seem like there is a resurgence. There is a resurgence for people interested in this kind of information. So
I am with you. Again, there's people that could be going, oh man, well, you hate cops. Listen.
Oh, hey, cop.
Again, you know what I think the new punk rock is? Common sense. Common sense is the new punk rock, right? And there's times where I look at like Ruby Ridge
Yeah,
or Waco, and I go, we understand there's a heavy hand to that. There needs to be a way of because the more and more I study law enforcement, the more and more I go, it seems like law enforcement's biggest job is protect the the property, the businesses of the elite,
sure.
right? Like that seems to be the big thing that they're doing. Like last night, and we can get into the Bolsheviks. I think we're in the middle of a Bolshevik revolution. That's my opinion. Karen Bass pulling the cops back during what was most likely immigration protests, which seems a lot like Antifa and BLM all over again, which are, listen, I am free Palestine to the bone, but I don't understand why stopping people from getting to their to the airport for their plane is going to help the Palestinians. What it does is piss people off,
Absolutely.
and that seems to be a bigger part of it. So it seems like the government has a monopoly on violence.
Absolutely. No, 100%. I mean, that's the only tool that government does have. That's how it enforces its laws. That's how it extracts funds. That's the only tool the government has. And I think that's another thing that, yeah, we need to talk about more is that do we really want to live in a society where like this is the peak, is government violence? Like that's the mechanism that binds us all to this so-called social contract, Like I think we could do better. I think we should strive to do better. And going back here for a second, you're absolutely right, Sam. There has been a couple different legal precedences that have stated, one being Warren versus DC in 1981, that police don't actually have a legal obligation to protect us. That's not part of the job description. And I know, again, that's a misnomer. That's something that people believe is absolutely true. It's probably the public school indoctrination that they've gone through, but we even saw during the Parkland shooting, they ruled it once again that cops don't have an obligation to protect us. That's not part of their job. Their job is to uphold laws, regardless if they like them, regardless if we like them. And that's exactly what happened during COVID. I mean, you talked about it earlier, like I mean, people are, going to be violently apprehended because they weren't wearing a mask in a certain place or whatever it was. I mean, I know there was plenty of cops that spoke out about a lot of the heavy-handed COVID policies and not, trying to enforce them. But there was plenty of cops that did too. And I think that's, exactly the problem with uh, any type of order follower. Whether it be somebody as a soldier or a cop, you have to follow orders regardless of your own moral inclinations.